This is a companion seminar or webinar to the one we did last month. So this is on CQIs. So there's a common theme, but today we're going to be talking about how to actually audit CQIs. For those of you that were on the previous one, you remember that we talked a lot about how to implement CQIs in your organization, what they were, and the value that they bring. Today, what we're going to be talking about is, you know where they are, you know why they exist. Now you're faced with doing a CQI assessment, a CQI audit. And so what we've done is we've brought in Carlene, who does a lot of these assessments, has more years doing these assessments than I do in industry, and can teach us all a little thing or two about how to audit these CQIs. So with that being said, Carlene, would you like to introduce yourself real fast before our first poll? Oh, Carlene, you're muted.
Good morning, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for signing on and attending this. My background's 45 years experience in manufacturing. My experience is in welding, heat treating, molding, assembly, training, implementation plans of all the ISO standards, including all the CQIs. This also includes IATF standards, performing gap analysis, implementation, and conducting internal audits.
All right, so I'm looking forward to learn a little something here. And in order for Carlene to effectively, let's say, target her message, what we're going to do here is we're going to ask for a little bit of feedback from you, from the participant, because as much fun as passive communication is, it does kind of dwell a little bit around that half-hour mark. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to do a real quick poll so that we know who we're talking to in the room. Because let's say that you are overseeing the CQI assessments, we may phrase it a little bit differently than we would if you were actually performing the CQI assessment. This helps us as trainers for the rest of the webinar kind of determine who we're talking to and determine the best course of action in terms of how to frame our message. So let's go ahead and launch the first poll. Now, there are going to be 4 questions on this one. The first question is, how will you rate your APQP? Ooh, notice we now made an association between APQP and CQIs. This is going to be one of those foreshadowing things. The second one, how strongly is your FMEA tied to your CQI results? Ooh, now we've hit not only APQP, but we foreshadowed the FMEA. Third one, in your organization, who's responsible for auditing your CQIs? And the reason we ask is because sometimes CQIs are off-put to the auditing function. Sometimes they are left with the engineering function. We would phrase these differently. And then we have those rare instances in which the corporate site goes and does the assessment. And lastly, we're looking for what CQIs are currently in use in your organization. And the reason is we are looking at doing a couple more of these. Plus, if we have a lot of people that say have coding as a CQI, Carlene may do a couple examples from her coding background. Or if we have a molding majority, we may do a couple from molding. Now, I have a rule. The fun stops when we hit 70%. We are currently at 50%, so we are getting up there, folks. If you want the fun to stop, participate. You guys thought this was going to be passive consumption today. All right, almost at that 70% mark, almost got that grand mean figured out. All right, we have crossed 70%. Let's go ahead and end this one. Now, what I'd like to do, I'd like to kind of share the results with you folks as participants. Now, why am I doing this? I think sometimes when it comes to CQIs, manufacturing standards, we feel like we're on an island. And so part of the reason why I share this is to show you that you're not alone on that island. The person to your left and the person to your right in this webinar are going through a lot of the same things. So when we talk about the answer to question 1, How well do you rate your APQP and the needs of your CQIs? So what the group has largely agreed with around 47, 45%, is that in your APQP, your CQIs are generally supported through new program development. However, there are 27% of you that say CQIs aren't even addressed. But here's the kicker. CQIs deplete your bottom line. So it's essential that if there is a customer specific requirement for a CQI, that assessment cost be built in to that APQP along with the resources in order to get it done. Because quite frankly, if it's not resourced, best of luck doing one after the program launches. Now let's take a look at the FMEA. Notice here we're pretty much split. Some people say it's somewhat tied to the results, and then some say not at all tied to the results. Now, I'm in my personal bubble right now, but if you are doing a CQI audit that is not based on your risk profile in your FMEA, you've completely missed an opportunity to do two things at once and gain some efficiency. But two, you're missing the prioritization and the intent. The intent is not to do the CQI assessment in a bubble. The intent is to do the CQI assessment in conjunction with some of these core tools. And what we're seeing from this poll, you guys aren't alone in that, right? At least 37% of you said, listen, the FMEA and the CQIs, totally separate worlds, not even tied in. All right, let's take a look here, because this is a good structural thing. For system builders like myself, this is the kind of question that I really like. A lot of your CQIs then, at least 45% are headed up by a local audit systems manager. So you might have some corporate oversight, but the corporate oversight might be limited to do, are the CQIs completed? So it generally does fall to the local audit system managers to do these types of assessments. Plus, when it comes to the engineering staff, here's the thing. You need a special blend, and Carlene's going to cover this later, of engineering prowess and the audit competency in order to pull off a CQI. Being too heavy in either area leads to a skewed CQI audit. So we're going to be talking a lot about who we should pull onto the teams and how that audit should commence. And lastly, when it comes to who we got in the room here, we got a lot of heat treaters, molders, some platers, and a lot of welders. So Carlene, if you got some examples from welding, heat treating, or molding from your background and such that you want to kind of throw out as you go through some of your tips, tricks, and techniques, this would be our audience. All right, with that, I'm going to stop blathering on here, and we're going to turn it over to Carlene there to walk you through how to do a CQI audit. Carlene?
Okay, thank you, everyone. Jeremy, are you going to take the poll screen off? Yeah, the poll screen is still showing.
All right, is it off?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Carry away.
So anyway, the agenda for today is common errors when conducting a CQI assessment. It's good to know and understand what foreseen errors could happen to prevent those during the assessment, how to prevent the errors, techniques on how to perform the assessment. Those of you who have taken internal auditor training for the ISO or IATF, the assessment is a type of audit, and there are standard techniques that can be used when conducting these assessments. Actions to take follow-up after the completion of the assessment. This is critical. This is not a desk audit. It's not a matter of just checking boxes. You will be issuing nonconformances to process owners. And again, the actions to follow up are crucial to drive continual improvement and ensure when you conduct the assessment the following year, these nonconformances are not still there. How to prepare, how to execute. You need to do your homework up front and prepare for the assessment. You never want to go into an assessment cold. You as an assessor are required to review work instructions, process flows, control plans, FEMAs, reviewing your supplier's annual self-assessments. Even though you may not be internally conducting these assessments, you need to know and understand how to conduct an assessment so that when you review your supplier self-assessment, you know that there's not just a clerical person sitting there checking the box. Next slide.
Before we go there, folks, just in case you tuned into this webinar, but you didn't hit the other one note I do want to cover here for just a moment. Within the realm of the IATF, there are core tools, and then there is also a focus on customer specific requirements. I want to make completely certain before we go into the deep dive, we know where we are. CQIs are a subsection of CSRs. The requirement to perform a CQI assessment comes from your customer specific requirements. So when you do this assessment, what Carlene's going to go through, make certain that you understand your CSRs in terms of how they want the assessment completed, because while there is a book out there, there may be some nuances in the CSRs that you've got to pay attention to. So just as a landmark moment, realize kind of where we are in this process. All right. So go ahead.
One other thing to add to this, Jeremy, the CQIs also, you are required to use the process approach. So when you look at the center with IATF, and you do look at APQP, SPC, PPAP, these are processes within your organization. And I would expect on your process map to see these individual processes outlined, pulling in the process approach. So common errors or problems when conducting a CQI assessment. Lack of support from top management. Those of you that are familiar with IATF and the ISO standards, the upgraded revisions are driving top management support, leadership. During an ISO IATF audit, the burden's on top management to show evidence of their support. Same thing with CQIs. IATF is an input. Top management is required to review your audits, your internal audits. That isn't just IATF and ISO, but this also includes the CQIs. There's not a qualified seasoned expert conducting the assessment, or the assessor has not completed internal auditor training. As an assessor, you are required to have minimum of 5 years experience and or education, totaling 5 years. And I see it all the time, whether I go on site to do an assessment or I do training. Individuals sign up for the training who are conducting the who will be conducting the assessments, and realize that they do not meet the minimum requirement. The process approach is not being utilized. The process approach, again, is a requirement of the ISO standards, IATF, and the CQIs. And the first slide we saw were SPC, MSA, core tools, FEMAs. Okay, all these are pulled in from the process approach before you even start an audit. I see so many times that individuals don't review this process map to see the linkage between the processes, where one process would be an input to the next process. As an example, receiving inspection would be an input into manufacturing. And if receiving inspection is weak, what does that mean? That linkage going into manufacturing is also going to be weak. There's no support from required process owners, from maintenance, calibration, document record control, training competency, management review. Process owners own the process. It's their responsibility to manage.
Oh, Carlene, you accidentally hit your mute.
Process owners own the process. Not only are they responsible, but they should also be given the authority to manage that process. If they don't have that authority, they are not the true process owner. No core tool training has been conducted. When you look through the CQI requirements in the assessment, APQP, FEMA, control plan, SPC, MSA, PPAP, these are all pulled into the assessment and linked in with each other. Next.
Yep. Real quick before we go to the next slide, folks, as a practical example, let's take a look at heat treat, right? Notice Carlene mentioned something extremely important. The 5 years of assessment experience, right? So we can teach you the process approach, let's say in an internal auditor class, but without the 5 years, it doesn't quite cut it. So a lot of times people will bring somebody like Carlene in to do the assessment, and that is completely fine. Outsourcing your audit process, including your CQI assessments, is a very valid type of strategy, especially if you don't want to develop that core competency in-house. When we talked about the process approach, and Carlene, this came up in an audit that I was doing with thermocouples in a heat treating process. When you look at the thermocouples in a heat treating process, right, for certain CQIs, there are only a certain number of reuse periods for those thermocouples. And so when we look at those thermocouples could come from the purchasing process, right? Who is buying those through MRO stores? Also, when we look at the linkage into what you were talking about with the FMEA, are the thermocouples listed in there alongside the control plan? So there's also certain measurement systems analyses that have to be done for things like heat treating. And so there are a lot of other processes that your CQIs are going to touch in addition to just the manufacturing process. I want you to think of the manufacturing process as the end result, your Y in effect for the Y equals F of X, and then the processes that feed it as your X's. So it's a much more advanced type of assessment than it is just the checklist. I see a lot of people from my side look at it like a checklist activity. It's going to require a lot more finesse than just the checklist. All right, let's go to the next one.
Other common errors. Control plans do not meet the minimum CQI frequency, lot size requirements, and/or the process parameters are not identified. When we talk about welding, molding, okay, there are process parameters. Those are required to be documented on your control plans. There's a column for it. Process they're either bank or it will say at the within the industry. Control plan. Your work instructions should equipment or gauges are either not in the calibration system or they're past due. This has been an ongoing issue within the industry for years. If you can't find a gauge, trust me, when you audit, your auditors typically have reviewed by top management during their process, okay, for all the ISO standards, IATF. Now, the assessments can be held directly after the completion of the assessment during management review. No, do what management review or and there's no established preventive predictive maintenance
All right, Carlene, we've got a situation where you're
guys.
cutting out
When
substantially.
we talk about welding, molding, heat treating, interview, your maintenance process, any PMs past due within the maintenance process. Okay.
Carlene, yeah,
Maybe
we're gonna pause real quick. You got some connectivity issues, so I'm gonna take over on this slide.
okay.
All right. So folks, on this one here, control plans not meeting the minimum CQI frequency and the lot size requirements and process parameters not identified. Depending on your CQI, you're going to have certain parameters that have to be identified. And again, the linkage from the PFMEA to the control plan is key. Plus, for anybody that's done these assessments for any length of time, notice the gauges are not in the calibration system or are past due. So again, this points to the process approach being extremely important. You might be in the manufacturing area, in the welding area, right? Notice how I just hit heat treating a minute ago, and now I'm hitting the welding. And you might be looking at the fixtures. You might be looking at the gauging. But at the same time there, you're going to have to go to the calibration system in order to determine whether or not the gauges are calibrated. You might have to go to the process engineering group to determine what types of parameters you need to check. And you're going to have to validate the PFMEA to the control plan linkage. So while you might be in welding, look at all of the intricacies that have to happen here. Now, these assessments should be fed into management through management review. Now, remember, we've got a lot of these assessments being done by the internal auditors. That's something that came up. So when we think about that, the audit results need to be part of management review. And this is the important thing and why we say this needs to be done and how to audit and why it's one of the big pitfalls. If you want resources, everything costs time or costs money. So where do you get time and money? Who's got the checkbook? Who sets priority? Management. If you don't engage your management, you're going to have an issue. And lastly, the preventative and predictive, notice there's a slash between those because they are different. There's no preventative / predictive maintenance process in place. So a lot of the failures we see in CQI assessments have to do with the fact that a lot of the, we'll call them disposable types of things like fixtures. We could look at them as thermocouples. There's no frequency to determine whether or not that fixture in a welding situation is actually going to give you a good weld because nobody's tracking the degradation, let's say, of that welding fixture. Notice this last bullet here. The intent of the CQI assessment is to drive continual improvement. At the end of the day, if you are constantly hunting the exact same things year after year or assessment after assessment, you have missed the boat. Okay. And that, my friends, becomes a cultural phenomenon. All right. Carlene, you want to take on this one here and we'll see if your communication came back? Oh. Carlene, are you with us? All right. So let's go ahead. I'll just, oh, you still got communication issues. You might try to log out and rejoin the webinar. I'll carry on.
Okay.
All right. So folks, now notice here, this section here, when conducting the assessment, okay? Take it from one of the guys that I follow, his name is Jocko Willink, and he keeps saying, communicate, communicate, communicate. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is communicate early, communicate often, And so one of the things that Carlene has found in working with different people, as have all of us auditors, is to communicate with top management 2 or 3 weeks prior to the assessment. Okay, realize that as an auditor, your presence in their world is going to disrupt their flow. You're in effect working in their world for a certain amount of time. And be prepared to interview process owners when performing the assessment. Now, this is an important thing. When we do IATF, everybody's always asking, how do I get my organization to understand IATF when we may not get time to do formalized training? And honestly, one of the best ways to do it, coach them during these forms of assessments. If you are the only person that knows how this works, you will never be able to offload the responsibility to answer those audit questions in an actual audit. All right, Carlene, looks like you're back. You want to take it over with ensure the required training?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Good to go now.
Okay,
Problem
I
solved.
apologize. I have no idea what happened.
That's why we
We
have
do
two
have
people.
we have a severe storm going through. I don't know if that was part of the problem or not. So anyway, ensuring the required training and qualifications have been met of the assessors. Not only should the assessor complete virtual or on-site training, but the process owners for maintenance, calibration, quality, human resources, document record control. I see so many times when I conduct these trainings, it's always a quality group. It should be a cross-functional team. You should have engineering, maintenance, even sales, purchasing, who have gone through this training so they know and understand the process approach. Ensure that management's engaged in this process. Again, how is management showing leadership, commitment? Are they reviewing these assessments? Reviewing the previous annual assessment and corrective actions. I don't know how many times I will go back and find that the corrective actions were not effective. The same nonconformances I see year after year. It's not a matter of just checking a box or sending out a corrective action request to a process owner. But when you conduct these assessments, you want to verify that these corrective actions have been implemented and they are effective. Jeremy?
Good to go.
So prepare for the assessment. This means upfront planning, okay? You want to pull those procedures, work instructions, control plans, FEMAs. So when you conduct the assessment, you interview process owners. You already know the answer to the questions that you're going to ask. What you're trying to find out is if the process owners and their team know what the answers are. Never go into this cold. If you do that, the perception is going to be that you're not prepared or you're not qualified to do these. You are required to do upfront planning. You want to ensure the assessment's been completed. All the evidence is documented. You never want to leave anything blank. If you leave a blank, the perception is you overlook something. If it's not applicable, then put NA in that black, but do not leave it blank. When a weakness is identified, discuss it with the process owner. Don't wait to the very end and say, oh, by the way, we found 10 nonconformances. Just like any audit that you conduct, you owe it to the individual that you are interviewing to let them know immediately up front that you've identified a weakness or a possible nonconformance so that they are not blindsided. You should conduct an opening closing meeting just like you would when conducting internal audit for the ISO or IATF standards. I would expect top management to be in the open and closing meetings, as well as your process owners. Jeremy?
On this one, I did want to chime in for just a second, folks. And this, for all of our auditors in the room, is not new. When we train internal auditors, And folks, whether we use the term assessment or audit, it's exactly the same. You want your preparation to be easily 80% of your time. Now, Carlene made a very important point. The pre-review is so important. You already know the answers. What you want to do is you want to prepare so that when you go out to the floor, you leave yourself some room to be surprised, right? You have to do that floor level assessment. But if you are auditing your own organization, especially, my personal ratios are as follows. If I'm doing an internal audit, 80% prep, 20% on floor. If I'm doing a supplier assessment, 50% prep, 50% floor. And then, of course, third parties don't do CQI audits. So it's one of those, if I was to do in a normal audit, if I was working with the certification body, I do 20 and 80%. So prepare for the assessment, review the documents up front. There shouldn't be a lot of surprises on your side. You want all the surprises to come during the time you're out on the floor. So when we train internal auditors, this is one of the most important things that we do, because most of you will not do a good document review prior to going out to do your audit. Plus, you see the common theme, over communication. If there's an issue, bad news first. And depending on your level of familiarity, from my standpoint, now Carlene's got a different background than I do, you may have to conduct an opening and closing meeting, but the formality of it is solely up to your organization, right? Again, whatever gets your point across, and there should be a clear, let's say, message on what's expected coming out. One of the biggest things I find with auditors is when they present nonconformances, like the CQI, you might have some nonconformances to their auditees. What you're going to find is they're not sure, the auditees are not sure what they want to do with it. Carlene?
Okay, next slide.
Right. We are on to our second poll, folks. What I'm going to do for you here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to launch the second set of polls, because we've been jawing now for roughly 30 minutes. Let's get you guys up, get you thinking. All right. Second set of polls. One of the things that we're interested, who oversees your CQIs? We know from the first set of polls who does them. Does your corporate office, your manufacturing site, or maybe you're an international company? And do you use software to complete your CQI assessments, or are you going out with the old paper Excel, right? And the last one is, we are looking at outsourcing our CQI audits. So if you're interested in outsourcing CQIs, we'll save that to the end, but that is a very valid strategy. I will tell you what, I subscribe to the Gary V model. I will triple down on my strengths, and I will then hire somebody to make up for my weaknesses. That's the way it works. So give you guys a second to do this part. And Carlene's going to give you a couple techniques now that we know what the most common pitfalls are to kind of overcome some of this. Right, and we have hit the 70%. All right, ending the poll. Let's share this out real quick, just so you know you're not alone on the island. When it comes to administering your CQIs, most of the people in this room administer them at the manufacturing site. A couple of them administer through the corporate office. And most of you, by and large, are using an overwhelming number of Excel spreadsheets. Got a couple people that use the ERP. And lastly, there is some people that would like information on doing the done-for-you style audits that Carlene does. I'll tell you what, if I had an organization today, I'd just call Carlene to come do it. All right, let's go ahead and stop sharing. So Carlene, why don't you walk them through your couple techniques here? How do you overcome some of those things that you talked about being the pitfalls?
Okay, so obviously we've already spoken about the pre-planning. That is very crucial. You want to meet with your team prior to performing the assessment, just like any other type of internal audit. You want to ensure everyone's on the same page. The lead assessor is responsible for this meeting and ensuring all team members understand their responsibility. You want to do this up front. Typically, I would have a lunch meeting, review this with the assessors, make sure everybody had done their upfront planning. You want to review the control plan to ensure the lot sizes and the frequencies meet the CQI minimum requirements. If they do not, you are not off to a good start. This is a huge weakness that I see within the industry. Individuals do not take those control plans and verify the lot sizes and the frequencies. You want to review the work instructions. Again, verify lot sizes, frequencies of required inspections. Again, do they match up with the control plan? I see this so often. The inspection frequencies on the control plan do not align with the work instructions for the individuals who are performing the work on the floor, whether it be welding, heat treat, molding. Review the previous assessment to verify corrective actions. Prior to even starting this assessment, then as you are conducting and performing the assessment, you're going to verify again that these corrective actions have been closed, they've been verified, and the corrective actions are effective. You want to verify there's linkage between the PFEMA and the control plan. Are there any pokeokes? Error proofing, okay? Are they identified in the PFEMAs, the control plans? Who performs the testing of the pokeokes? Who runs these red rabbits? Typically, this is performed within the industry at the beginning of each shift. They absolutely need to be identified in the work instructions. Are the red rabbits in the calibration system? Calibration is a required process for IATF. Again, pulling in the process approach. Review the process map. What are the linkages between the processes? Review turtle diagrams if those are being used, or process flow diagrams, applicable processes you will be assessing. Heat treat, welding, you're not just assessing the manufacturing process, but you are also assessing support processes such as training, maintenance, document control. So that's why it's so crucial that you do review this process map to see what other processes link into the manufacturing process. Jeremy?
All right. I have a couple things here on this one that I want to make sure we understand because this is a little different than what we would normally tell you in a process audit. So pay attention to this one. Notice when you do like a process audit, you're doing the FMEA to the control plan, and there's a lot of linkage that's included there. So we're in an automotive organization, we're pretty good on that. We're coming better on that, the FMEA to control plan. But the two pieces right here that I think are unique to CQIs is that for some CQIs, there are lot sizes and frequencies that are minimums by the CQI. If you do a normal process approach type audit or a process-based audit, and you're not sure that the CQI is there, you'll never know that the CQI has kind of a recommended, or I should say required instead of recommended, a required minimum. So this is an additional thing brought on by the CQI. So your FMEA to your control plan may be stellar, but the control plan to the CQI minimum may be a little bit different. And the work instruction to the control plan match. I will tell you that in all process audits that I've done, CQI or otherwise, that's one of those areas that is a big source of variation, because it's during the control plan that sample size and frequency are called out. So the FMEA to the control plan can be correct, but looking at the sample size and frequency versus what goes on the floor now, that's a completely different realm of looking. So if you're looking for two things on here that may be a little bit different than what you're currently doing, These two are the two that I would make sure that when it comes to CQIs, you spend a little more time with if you were to prioritize over others. All right. Carlene, on to you.
Okay, so when performing the assessment, again, you want to ensure the control plan. You have the control plan and the assessment form with you. Many of you may do control plan audits. These are excellent process audits, but when conducting the CQI assessment, ensure you have that control plan and you walk that control plan. You want to verify the frequencies and lot sizes again. You're going to do this up front. Now as you walk the control plan, physically perform the assessment on the manufacturing floor, you are going to visually verify that the operators are conducting these inspections to the correct frequencies and the correct lot size. You want to interview process owners. Don't forget the operators. You need to interview the operators. You want to ensure that they know and understand what their function is. Do they know where their work instructions are at? You're going to be taking down names. You'll be pulling training documents. Not only do you want to ensure that they've been trained, but you want to see evidence that they have been rendered as competent. I see so many times a process owner will show me their skill matrix. It's a beautiful matrix, has a operator's initials, the date. However, there's no backup documentation supporting that this individual is competent. It's not a matter of just checking boxes and filling out a skill matrix. You're going to be reviewing evidence, okay? These are records of evidence to show compliance, such as inspections, calibration, maintenance, documents for correct revision levels, APQP. You'll be interviewing process owners from APQP process. Calibration, maintenance, document control. These are all processes that link into the assessment. You want to verify the records when interviewing the process owners. Okay, this is just a verbal question answer period. You're going to ask the operators, how often are you required to check the hardness on the product? Say if they tell you 5 parts on the hour, great. Your next question should be, can you show me? Can you show me the record that this is physically being done? It's a process owner's responsibility to make sure the documents are readily available. Even though you've done your homework up front and you've reviewed these documents, now you are testing these process owners as you interview them to see if they know the answer. Do they know how to get their hands on the work instructions and the applicable documents? Jeremy?
All right. The one thing that I kind of wanted to cover here, folks, in terms of actionable techniques, one thing you want to think about with what Carlene just mentioned, I want you to get in the habit of looking 3 levels deep. Okay. In general, so I'm in my own bubble right now. If you can go 3 levels deep and every time you turn over a rock, you find it's what you expect to see, let's say, then you can stop turning over rocks. What Carlene just mentioned, that is something that a lot of people don't know that do CQI assessments or otherwise, is that competency and training are not the same thing. You can be trained and completely incompetent. So when she said something about the skills matrix, that is nothing more than a sheet of paper. And what we do, applying the 3 levels over to what I just mentioned, if you show me the skills matrix and it says Joe is doing the heat treat cut apart on shift 2, that's just the first level. Now I have to go out and I have to go to that heat treat shift 2. I have to see Joe at that cut apart station, and then I have to go talk to Joe. There's step 2. Now, when I talk to Joe about doing heat treat cut apart, Joe tells me all about this and that and where his visual standards come from. That's the 3rd level. So I might start with the skills matrix, but I keep turning over rocks until we get to the point in which I feel confident that I can make an objective assessment. The other thing that Carlene mentioned that's important, most of the time I would tell you that it's an amateur move to run out there with the, say, checklists or sheets when you're auditing. On a CQI, having the assessment form with you because of the sheer volume of data allows you to have a good roadmap. And I use the term roadmap because here's the cautionary tale I want to tell you. Do not turn a trail into a rail using a check sheet. Okay. The trail should allow for variations. It should allow you to go where the audit or the assessment takes you. But when a checklist turns a trail into a rail, it becomes a liability. All right, Carlene, back to you. You're muted, Carlene.
Gauges are in the calibration system. This also includes your red rabbits. I don't know how often I see red rabbits painted red and they're stickered reference only. These are used to verify that your poka-yoks are working. They're working properly. Are they being used on the manufacturing floor? Are the gauges on the floor? Are they within the calibration dates? PM records, are they completed? When you interview your process owner, okay, from the maintenance process, the first thing I ask for is a recall list. I want to know if there's any PMs past due. Are they completed on time? Are there work instructions for the PMs to be performed? Work instructions and procedures, are they at the correct revision levels? In this day and age, typically within the industry, most organizations have these electronically, and they'll have a screen, a computer screen at the workstation. The most up-to-date document is on that computer screen. The operator clicks on it, then they're assured they have the most current revision level. Companies or organizations that use hard copies, that's high maintenance. It's more difficult to control. Our inspection records to ensure all the required inspections have been performed in accordance, not just the control plans, but also work instructions. Have the CQI and customer specific requirements been reviewed during the APQP process? You'd be surprised how many times during the APQP process up front, starting with the RFQ, the request for quote, that the CQIs and the CSRs are not reviewed. You're awarded the program, you start production, and you realize you have to buy more equipment. These are documents that absolutely should be reviewed starting with the RFQ. Jeremy?
Nothing to add to that one. That one's self-explanatory. Carry on.
Okay, verify red rabbits again. Are they used for verification? Are they identified in the control plans, the FEMAs? You want to ask questions when interviewing in such a way that you're not giving them the answer. You already know the answer. Your job's to see if the individual knows the answer. You would never go out to an operator and say, I read in the work instruction, check 5 parts on the hour, right? Well, you just gave them the answer. The question should be, can you show me the work instruction? Can you explain to me how this works? You want to conduct the assessment based on the flow of the material from receiving through manufacturing, final inspection, and shipping. You're going to follow the flow. So if you're walking the control plan, that automatically is going to take you through the flow of the material. You're going to verify corrective actions from previous assessments. Record PMs, document gauge numbers. This way you don't have to keep a huge pile of paperwork. If you take very good notes and write down individual names, document numbers, equipment numbers, gauge numbers, due dates, you don't have to keep all these documents. You want to verify training, evidence of competency records, not just operators, but of the process owners too. You want to be aware of your surroundings. Is there a 5S program? Is there sufficient lighting? Are containers identified? Is there suspect material mixed with acceptable product? Is there a staging areas for receiving, final, shipping? Is there a quarantine area for suspect material?
And you can learn more about CQI's structure, connection within organizations, or more on our YouTube channel. I'll also email out a link to all of these after our event today. And then if you're looking for some of that training or consulting, feel free to contact us on our website, plexusintl.com.